Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of the Trick Play Podcast. I'm Simon Jaskowski here with Caleb Peterson, and shortly we will be diving into all the sports related news, rumors, and drama that has been circling around the sports world in the last week. And it's safe to say we're both pretty excited to be doing so. Both of us have brought a little bit of experience covering sports into this, obviously, both in different avenues, and I'll let Caleb touch on his side. I'm a play by play color commentator, PA announcer. I've dipped my toes a little bit everywhere for the St. Trojan, which is a Canadian college, and also a little bit for Hockey Alberta, which is a local hockey, local hockey company in my area. And I've been trying to just dip my toes all wherever I can in the sports avenue, jumping into podcasting, because why not? And yeah, and I'll let Caleb kind of cover his side of things.
Yeah, for sure. For me, less so on the announcing front, more so on the writing front. Spent the last year over at UBC Vancouver, writing for a student paper over there, the UBC. I've mostly covered sports during my time there. I took a look at kind of Vancouver sports culture, looking at the kind of shockwaves still resonating in the community around the Grizzlies moving, and then covered some Thunderbird athletics as well, covering a few football games, and looking at that team. So that's kind of the experience I bring to the table, but also a lifetime of obsessing over sports and all the different athletes and listening to podcasts just like this one. So I hope all of that experience totals up to at least a semi-confident podcasting role. So
Yeah, that's all we can hope for on both sides. I can definitely tell you that, because I mean, at
yeah,
the end of the day, even if we both bring a little bit of professional, semi-professional, whatever you want to call it, experience in this, still a fan podcast. We're both just here trying to have a little bit of fun in the evenings and just try and talk a little bit about the sports we love, the teams we love, all that. And with this podcast, obviously, well, with this episode, I mean, we'll be talking about the NBA draft. That's the big story of the week. I think that's pretty safe to say. I believe this will be going up day of, so that's going to be exciting. And then after that, we'll be hopping into a little bit of NHL action with three big names in Canadian teams that could potentially be on the move. Then obviously we've got the pretty already iconic William Karlsson Stanley Cup parade speech, which honestly I'm very excited to speak about. And we've got two potential NFL stars potentially hooking up in maybe the later parts of their careers to maybe try and make a run at the Super Bowl that's been eluding both of them. Then we'll move into a QB battle, happening over on the NFC side of things, and maybe what that could mean for the entire division. And after that, move into a little bit of baseball, talk about the Oakland situation, potentially moving over to Vegas, and yeah, after that, think that'll be it. I think we're ending with I think that'll be it. But obviously, like I said, we'll start with a little bit of NBA draft action, and yeah, I mean, obviously we can start at the top. Victor Wembanyama. You want to give me your thoughts on him, Caleb?
yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a reason why he's been dubbed the best prospect since LeBron. Just looking at him, he's kind of complete physical freak of a player. He's I kind of made the comparison to kind of create a player in 2K where you see in social media these just like insane monstrosities that people create with like 20-foot arms and
Oh yeah,
like
duck
10
it from
feet
half court.
tall. Yeah, exactly. It's a little as close as we can get to that in real life with Wembanyama.
Oh for
I
sure.
believe he's like 7'4" or something, and he not only can play in the paint, but also has a pretty killer 3-point shot as well. Anytime you see a guy that tall able to drain shots from the beyond the 3-point line, it's pretty insane. Um, so yeah, there's obviously a reason he's considered to be going number one. Uh, Obviously, it's anytime you have a prospect like this in any sport, you always wonder. It's such a boomer bust type thing. Does he become someone like the next LeBron, or thinking to like a football comparison? Is it more of a could it turn into a Jamarcus Russell because it'll either be the start of a glorious 20-year Hall of Fame career, or he can go down in history as one of the most overhyped prospects of all time. Because when you give a player like Wembanyama this much hype, there's really no in between, right? Um, people are already setting the standard so high for him. Just a middle of the road career wouldn't be it. So it's definitely one of those moments in the sports world, even as not much of a basketball fan myself, when a player like him comes around, you kind of start to take notice.
Yeah, of course. And like you mentioned, even if he's just a pretty high level starter, that's not enough. I think everybody is expecting, like you said, Hall of Fame level, like a Hall of Fame level career from him. Wherever, obviously, we know he's probably going to the Spurs. Probably isn't really a probably. He's going to the Spurs. But I mean, it really is the type of situation where, like, if he isn't exactly what the Spurs have been looking for ever since they lost, I mean, Kawhi or Tim Duncan retired, like that big name that's going to bring them back up to the 2000s, 90s, that level of Spurs. I mean, what's the point in using your first overall pick on him, right? And I mean, obviously, a lot of people are talking about him like he's a sure thing, but personally, and I know I talked to Caleb a little bit about this before the podcast. I'm personally a little worried about injuries, especially when you look at anybody who's that tall, that skinny, right? Like it's a tough thing to look at there. It's just at some point you got to think that all that height, all that weight, it's going to start mounting on the knees. And can you really make a 20-year career out of a 7'4" frame?
It's definitely a question, right? It's for me not having the biggest insight into basketball, but just seeing a little bit of the trend of this new player who is the 7 foot, like, lanky kind of guy who can pretty much do everything. Since it's such a new kind of prototype, how successful can that prototype be in the long run, right? We've seen it be successful in college. We've seen it be successful in like the pro leagues in Europe with Wembanyama, but can it survive the grind of an 82 game NBA season plus whatever the playoffs bring? And looking at players like Chet Holmgren, who's built very similarly, you're already starting to have questions, right? Because he drafted number 2 overall a year ago, hasn't played a single game for the Thunder, who in a game where or in a season where they outperformed expectations, having him on the roster could have put them over the edge. Is that what the Spurs are going to be ultimately dealing with in their future? Having a good team around Wembanyama, but just not having him available. It's certainly a question you have to think about.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, the hope is that the answer is no. Obviously, like for all we know, we could see an injury-free career. Probably, I don't want to say probably not. That feels mean, but like it's just so tough these days. I mean, you look at a guy like, for example, the big one, glaring one. He's been all over the news. We don't have to talk about it, but Zion Williams. He's been the guy, or Zion Williamson. Sorry. Anyway, it's he's been the big one, obviously, with the injuries issues derailing his career a little bit. Everybody's still hoping he can hop on the horse, but obviously, I don't think anybody wants that from Wembanyama. And obviously, that the hope is that we're not going to see that. But I mean, when you're looking at a physical, just athletic freak like he is, you got to talk about it. At least in my opinion, you have to think about you got to weigh the pros and cons. Obviously, the pros through the ceiling. Like this guy has the potential, has the frame, has the abilities, has everything to be easily one of the greatest athletes, players of all time. That's what we've been talking about since, honestly, this guy was like 14. But it's just scary when you look at a guy 7'4". Like I said, can you really expect a 20, even 15-year career out of that?
Yeah, and the kind of to kind of think on that more, it's the only real criticism you can give to him, right?
Yeah.
Because everything else is within his control. This is the one thing that it doesn't matter how good he is, if he faces injury concerns that are significant. Like if he's injured out for a season but otherwise plays well, it doesn't have any long-term effects, whatever. But if it's a situation like Zion where so far it's affected all 4 years of his career to where he's never played a full season. If it's that kind of thing, then it's the one thing that can degrade him as a prospect because um, just because it's the one thing that his skills can't account for, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one. Obviously, I've seen a little bit on Twitter about people being scared about how he has more turnovers than assists, but like, how much merit can you really give anything Twitter says these days? So,
No,
and
there's
personally,
there
when
yeah,
you're putting the ball in the hand of a guy like Wembanyama, like the team he's been on, I can only imagine he's getting the ball a lot. When you're getting the ball that much and you're a scorer, not really a playmaker, you're gonna have a turnover every once in a while. I mean, that's just the game, right? It's just how it is. I wouldn't put too much merit in that personally.
no, there's always some sort of a little bit out there draft rumor, no matter what sport it is, kind of flying around on Twitter. Like I remember, um, always to kind of get these prospects down or degrade them, especially when they're this highly rated. Some sort of small nitpick about their play gets inflated. I think to football, the thing I think back to is a couple of years ago where is it people were terrified that Jamar Chase wasn't able to catch footballs if they didn't have stripes on them. It's a kind of like small concern
Oh
where
yeah, I remember that
um,
one.
yeah, it's just a little bit overblown just to for the sake of conversation, right?
Yeah, of
The
course.
only real concern you'd ever have with him is the injury aspect, just because that's out of his control.
Yeah, and I mean, with guys like that, it's a thing that comes up, and I mean, obviously, I'm I know I'm coming off as being a bit of a downer on that topic because I mean, when I look at a guy with his frame, with his attributes, it's hard not to talk about it. Obviously, I mean, you mentioned Holmgren, or sorry, yeah, 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 Holmgren. There we go. I knew I had to. That's my bad. I'm tired. Anyway, when you mentioned him, he got hurt obviously in the summer league, and that was very very unfortunate. But and nobody wants to see that from Wembanyama. But after something like that happened only a year ago, it's got to come up. And I mean, but obviously that something as scary as that isn't going to impact who the Spurs are taking first overall.
Yeah, I think for you the question has to be, Simon, how much does it scare you? Does it scare if you're the GM of the Spurs? Does it scare you enough to consider other options? I know obviously that's not going to happen, but put control in your hands. What is the level to which you would be willing to look at other options?
That's the thing with that though, because that's such a hard topic because I almost feel like a pick like that is like make or break for some GM careers. And just follow me when I say that because let's say I say nope, I'm I'm not interested. Let's take Henderson, right? Let's take the athletic point guard. Injury risks are a little bit lower for that. He's got a pretty built frame. He's an athletic guy, less injury concerns, yada yada. Could go on forever. And then when Banyama turns into the Hall of Fame career that everybody wants him to have, you're gonna look like an idiot, right? That's the thing. You're gonna look like the guy who passed on Wembanyama, right? But you take Henderson, Wembanyama unfortunately gets injured and struggles with injuries his entire career. It's a bit of a different story. You're all of a sudden the guy who saw it all coming. You're the guy who made sure to miss out on arguably the biggest bust in the history of basketball since Anthony Bennett, almost. I guess you could throw. It feels early to say Zion in there, but you know what I mean. Like it's a tough decision to make. I think. I mean, like you said, it's not going to impact anything. They're going to take Wembanyama. You asked what I'd do. I'd probably take Wembanyama. That's what you gonna do, right? It's a very very tough situation for anybody, honestly.
You almost don't have a choice,
No,
really.
you really don't. So obviously, I'm sure you've heard about the big news around the NHL lately. Has mainly been guys on the block. Obviously, the Stanley Cup's all done and wrapped up. We've got some pretty great drunk speeches, but other than that, it's mainly just been who's leaving, who's staying, all over the league. And with a lot of the big Canadian teams, we're seeing a lot of that where obviously no Canadian team really made it very far in the playoffs this year. We're just trying to see who is going to make the big move, who's going to try and do something new. And we're the three big names I'm sure you've probably heard about: Hellebuck, Hanifin, and DeBrincat for Winnipeg, Calgary, and Ottawa, respectively. Those are the three big names on the move, at least right now, that most insiders are talking about. I don't know if you have any major thoughts on any of the three of them, but personally,
Yeah, I mean,
oh, go ahead.
no, I mean, like, for sure, any one of these players, depending on if they go to the right place, could be a game changer, right?
Yeah.
It's either like the perfect forward anyone needs for their top six to put it all together, the one last quality top pairing defenseman that a team needs, or a franchise goalie. But to kind of, I don't know where you want to start. I could talk about. I feel like Hellebuck is probably the biggest name
I'd probably
out
say
of the
so.
three.
Although strangely, when I've been looking all over the rumor wire, Hellebuck is the one that I've been seeing the least strangely, and I honestly think it's probably because when you look at these three players, he's probably going to be the one getting the most amount of money. Although, for all I know, we could obviously DeBrincat could have a crazy season wherever he goes and get a ridiculous contract. But as of right now, I feel like it's pretty safe to say that Hellebuck's probably going to get the most because he's been an elite goalie for pretty much a decade. I feel like I'm not quite sure when he started, but he has been very, very solid for a long time. You could say the same thing with Hanifin. He's been a pretty solid defenseman for both Carolina and Calgary for probably, I think he was drafted in 2016, 2015. Both of them
Yeah,
have been very, very solid. DeBrincat's obviously newer, but all three of these guys, like you said, could be real, real game changers.
yeah. I'd say that the one difference is for Hellebuck, because for sure, like all of these players have been solid for a long time, like pretty much known quantities. But the one thing for Hellebuck is just in terms of the position he plays, especially with all of these goalies getting big contracts and then just failing to live up to them. You can look at Bobrovsky, who's the highest paid goalie right now. I think he's making like 10 million a year. Other
Although
than this
I think with
playoffs,
him, he kind of lived up to it a little bit this playoff run. He was pretty incredible. But
oh yeah, but if you asked anybody before this season, it was like this contract itself was a laughing stock. He wasn't even starting.
that's
Um,
true. Yeah,
he
Spencer
wasn't even
Knight was
starting with
definitely
Alex
giving him a run
Lyon.
for his money.
Yeah, because they had so much goalie depth that they didn't even play their $10 million guy, and you can see the same thing happen in Calgary with Markstrom. He fell off this year. Same thing with Jack Campbell in Edmonton. Came in only for like a couple games in the playoffs, and the starter was a rookie. Like the biggest thing with Hellebuck is if you're gonna sign or trade for him, it's the closest thing to a known quantity and goal that you can get. And for a lot of these teams, that's kind of what they need to get themselves over the hump.
Yeah.
Because like you can see how goaltending transforms a team. Just look at Vegas, right?
Oh
Or
yeah.
Vegas and Florida.
Aiden Hill
Vegas and
definitely
Florida.
flipped a switch this playoff run.
Oh yeah, and it's that kind of like that's almost what you need to get yourself. I'd say goaltending is the difference in a lot of these like playoffs. Like look at Boston, they had the best goalie in all of the regular season, and then he's playing injured and he's underperforming, and they squander one of the best, the best season in regular season history in the first round.
Yeah, and you
That
mentioned
it makes such a difference.
oh for sure, and you mentioned Hellebuck being like the probably the most. I'm not sure what the word you use, but the one I'll use is probably the most consistent goaltender that you could probably get this offseason, which and with consistency has been a big issue for a lot of goalies, obviously. But the thing with Bobrovsky is you could almost argue the same thing for him before he signed his big contract. I don't think anybody
Hmm.
could have seen the fall off coming. And even for Markstrom, arguably. Well, maybe not
Yeah.
to the same degree. But you could very easily say that Markstrom flopping after that contract is a little bit of a shocker too. But the interesting thing with Bobrovsky and Markstrom is they're both kind of in a similar situation there where they both have two young goaltenders coming up the rankings, and arguably, if they both succeed, could be the starter next year. And both goalies are on huge contracts for like another 3-4 years in both their situations, I believe. I'm not sure on I'm
Hmm.
not as fresh on Bobrovsky's, but I know for Markstrom, he's still there for another 4 years, right? So and with Dustin Wolf and Knight respectively is what I mean by the two young goaltenders. So that's definitely interesting, and in my opinion, is going to probably start to almost lower the goaltending market. I think because I don't know how many teams are going to be interested in paying Hellebuck the $9 million he's asking for. In a Sportsnet article that I have pulled up, Ken Wiebe says north of $9 million, which is bonkers to me because I'm not sure how much Carey Price was making even at his heights, but I don't believe it was probably 10 million, 11 million, right? Like it's definitely hard to make the argument that you want to pay a goaltender over 10 mil. That's tough. At least
but he's gonna get it. He's gonna get it though, because wouldn't you say given the play that he's had, you pay him more than Bobrovsky, right? Like it's gonna be no matter where he signs. I think it's gonna be a market resetting kind of contract. It's because who else can you name that's been as consistently good as he had? I think it's Vasilevsky, and that's about it. Because every other goalie has had their doubts. But I think it is an interesting point that you bring up because it is a bit of a trend for goalies to flop as soon as they move teams, which I think is really interesting and kind of speaks to how unique the position is and how important like the mental game is.
It's almost like pitching. I'd almost compare it to pitching in the MLB where like you see pitchers move all over the place. They'll go to like one place and they'll be throwing a 6.0 ERA and then they'll go back to another place 2.5 or whatever, 2.7. You know what I mean? Like it's the same thing almost with goaltenders. It's wherever they're going to be most comfortable, and obviously defense matters. Well, still for pitching, but defense matters a hell of a lot more, and arguably for goaltending, I'd say, because I mean, you look at, I'd argue, well, I don't know if I agree with myself. I was about to say that could be a big reason Markstrom fell off, but I don't know. Flames still had
with the defense of the Flames.
Yeah, I think they still had a pretty good defensive team. It's hard.
I think that was more on Markstrom. Like like statistically, you can see he played worse this year than he did last year, and I think that's the issue. That's like the big dilemma in signing Hellebuyck is he's been one of the most consistent players at his position, probably one of only two that's been consistently good for about a decade, and considering how important goaltending is, if your team needs it and you get it, like think of Hellebuyck went to the Leafs. Like how did they? I
don't think they could pay him.
Like they are like an instant cup favorite. I think if Hellebuyck goes to the Leafs.
At least to the Leafs. At least the Leaf fans.
There's always doubts every year, but like if the one thing that Toronto's missing this year is consistent present and goal, aside from all the other unique Leafs things with how their players who are good underperform consistently. But that's the one side of it. But the other side is the track record of other goalies moving teams is so volatile and so consistently can blow up in other people's faces. Think of Bobrovsky, think of Markstrom, think of Campbell, who were considered like especially Markstrom and Bobrovsky. You're right; they were considered sure things until they moved, or for Markstrom even he had one good year and then it kind of fell off. Like, do you take the chance with how volatile the position can be? It's kind of a catch-22. You really, I don't think there is a right or wrong decision. It's going to be really interesting to see what the results are. Because if he flops, it's going to be an interesting case. Like if Hellebuyck flops, how many teams are going to be willing to take a chance on another goalie in the future?
Well, that's kind of
because he's like the biggest sure thing. Like I think more so than Bobrovsky or Markstrom was.
Really,
if he flops,
I agree with you on Markstrom.
I
don't know if I agree on Bobrovsky because you got to realize he was probably solid for like didn't he win the Vezina in 2013? Like he was solid from like 2013 all the way up to when did he go over to Columbus? 2021, 2022. 2021, I think. You're gonna have to fact check me, but he was. I'd argue he was very, very good for a long time, and I don't know if Hellebuyck can necessarily. Hellebuyck was really good for a while, but I don't know if he was that long. I feel like I'm talking about.
I don't know. I feel like it's either. Just speaking, I'd have to look at the stats too, but Bobrovsky definitely was more consistent than Markstrom, but Hellebuyck has been.
They're a bit more comparable, probably. I'd argue.
Yeah, I think Bobrovsky and Hellebuyck are pretty comparable, but even like taking it as if Bobrovsky was more of a sure thing coming out, then it's just more evidence in favor. Because you can say Hellebuck is similar. Bobrovsky, you can say, oh, it's a one-off thing. With Hellebuck, it's starting. If Hellebuck flops, it's starting to become a trend.
Yeah, Bobrovsky starting in 2016, 2017. Or no, sorry, I'm talking about Hellebuck. My bad. My bad. Hellebuck started in his first season was in 2015, 2016, which God, I can't remember his name now. Oh, that's gonna annoy me. But I can picture the goalie in my head who was Winnipeg starter in 2015, 2016. But
Oh,
he
Andre
was
Pavelec?
yes, that's his name. And then he replaced Pavelec in 2016, 2017. So he's been good for a long time, but that's
Like
yeah,
7 years. But
that's pretty comparable.
even
to
look at Bobrovsky. Bobrovsky,
We should probably move on.
because
We're getting. We should probably move on. We still have two more players to talk about.
this is true.
Yeah.
Here we can. I'll wrap up just given the
Sure.
Bobrovsky comparable because I think it is about the same because
Yeah.
it's about 7 years. It's been about 7 years for Hellebuck. Columbus, Bobrovsky and Columbus had a run of about it's 8. So
yeah.
it's pretty comparable.
close.
It's pretty comparable. So it'll be certainly interesting to see where he goes and how he does.
I think yeah, of course. And moving on to the two other players we got, Noah Hannafin and DeBrincat. We'll start with Hannafin. We'll move into the probably biggest. I'd argue probably the guy who probably gonna get the biggest paycheck at the end of the day because I mean think about how much forwards are paid these days. But Hannafin, he could probably. I think there's gonna be a lot of people after Hannafin, and I think it might happen soon. I've been hearing a lot of stuff about that, which will be very interesting for the Flames and whatever team gets them. I've been hearing a lot of different teams, so it's hard to keep track. I thought I heard Seattle at some point. Which would be interesting. Him going to Seattle would be cool, but I mean,
Yeah,
who knows?
I certainly wouldn't be upset if he goes to Seattle. I mean, it's the kind of thing where Hannafin is the kind of player where he's not gonna like wow you, but he's not gonna be a liability either.
No,
He's just kind of that constant, steady force on the blue line.
It feels like, at least personally, and to just throw out the context, me and Caleb are both Flames fans, so I think we've both watched enough Hannafin to be able to talk pretty confidently on this. He's always felt like he's one season away from breaking out. He's always been one of those guys. You know what I mean? Like he's always felt like he's 26 now, but the whole time we've had him, it's felt like next year he could be that guy, right? He could be the number one, but he's just not. And he's always been like top pairing or second pairing. He's always been really, really good or really consistent, but he's never been elite or he's never been that like top tier. And I almost feel like with the Flames' history of trading people and them turning into second coming of Christ, I could almost see him going really wherever he goes, turning into an elite defenseman, right? You never know. Right?
It also depends situationally too, like depending on who he's paired with.
Yeah.
Because the one thing that was good with his time in Calgary is that Calgary does have a solid defense there. Because correct me if I'm wrong, he was paired with Tanev for a while, right? Like that was.
I can't remember now. I think so. That sounds right. Tanev. I think he played a little with. Who else did he play with? Oh. Damn.
Anderson.
Did he? Yeah, maybe.
I don't
Anderson
know.
Sounds
I think
right.
he might have played with Anderson.
Tanev and
Those
Anderson
are all.
probably.
Those are both provide like great compliments to Hannafin. Tanev with kind of the veteran experience.
Well, I mean, Tanev's been arguably one of the best defensive defensemen for the last however many years. 10 decade?
Oh yeah.
How long has he been in the league?
Oh yeah.
Long time. Like he's always been that guy, right? So you throw anybody on, and then the Flames have taken advantage of that, where they'll throw Shillington out there. Shillington's anybody who's watched a Flames game when Shillington was playing, he fly down the ice like absolutely no regard for any sort of defense. He was that guy, but you didn't have to worry about it because Tanev was back there, right? And you could make the argument maybe that boosted Hannafin if he was playing a lot with Tanev. You never know, right?
Yeah.
But I'd still argue Hannafin's a pretty sure thing. I think whoever gets Hannafin is going to be pretty happy. Whatever the Flames get for Hannafin is going to be a pretty solid package, I'd imagine. I've been hearing a lot of big things. Like I could definitely
Yeah,
see.
perhaps.
I could
The
see.
only
I know that the big.
the only thing I'd say against that is like because he's a free agent in a year, how much does that dilute your return,
Yeah,
right?
but it's the
Like,
same thing with DeBrinket, I believe, right? Isn't DeBrinket
but DeBrincat's
also?
an RFA. DeBrincat's
Is
an
he?
RFA
Oh, okay, that's my bad.
because that changes things
It does. I agree.
because
Yeah,
they still have the Sens still have control over him, right?
sure.
That's
Yeah,
why they were willing to give up so much in the first place.
yeah,
Like
and
if we want to start talking about DeBrincat too, I think that's
sure.
an
Yeah.
interesting comparable too
Well,
because
as a
it's
very biased Flames fan, DeBrincat for Hannafin would be just great, but that's not going to happen because the hockey world is cruel.
but there's
But
yeah, it would be nice, but again, there's like the leverage part of it too.
sure.
Hannafin,
Yeah. There's a lot
if
there.
he could play out another year in the Flames, and then you could get him for nothing.
Poof. Yeah, like he's
To break it, you have complete control, barring an offer sheet, which never happens.
although I don't know how much there is behind this, but I swear I was hearing rumors about DeBrincat potentially not wanting to be in Canada. I thought that was something that was starting to be spread around. I don't remember
I
how
could see that.
sure of a thing that is. So again, take that with a grain of salt. But
No, I could understand that because otherwise, why would I don't even understand why Ottawa's looking to trade him because it wasn't even like a year ago at this point that they got him, and he was looking to be the piece that kind of brought it all together for Ottawa.
yeah,
Now
sure.
that didn't really happen, but Ottawa's still such a young team with so much potential that I don't really understand why you would want to trade away to break it unless there's something else going on that we don't know about, like he's unhappy with the situation, whether that be location, coach, teammates, who knows, right?
Yeah. And DeBrincat's obviously he's a very, very skilled playmaker, and we've seen that, especially shown in his time with the Blackhawks and or Blackhawks, Ottawa, both sides. And I think he did he have his best year this year, or was it a down year? I don't remember. I'm not too sure. I think he was pretty solid. Like
I can check that. I
Yeah.
think it was. I don't think it was anything crazy.
no,
Yeah, he had it was a bit of a down year compared to last year. This year he had 66 points. Obviously not bad.
no,
But last
not
year
at
he
all.
had 78 in Chicago.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense playing with guys like Kane. I don't
Yeah,
necessarily diss DeBrincat for that. Kane's gonna Kane.
no, it's this is true. This is true. Although the other thing, looking at it, obviously it's plus minus, so take it with a giant grain of salt because it's kind of the dumbest stat of all time. But it is
Sure.
like enough of a drop off to be concerned where he's negative 31.
Oh, really? Oh, I kind of want to put
Yeah.
in a stat sheet now. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's
Because
yeah,
you
it's going
pointed
from
out
like
take it with
hovering
a grain of
around
salt, but
minus
when it's
10.
that low,
Yeah, that's what I said. Like if I'm seeing a little bit of a drop off, I can
Sure.
brush it off, but like it's a drop of like negative 20 from the previous year, which is already lower than what his career average was.
All right. Well, let's try and wrap this up a little bit. Who do you think is going to be the most valuable to like a certain team, and where do you think that person's going to end up going? If you were to just throw out a random bold prediction, I don't know how much attention you've been paying to all the rumors on that, but who do you think would be the most valuable to whatever team? Kind of a
I still
open question, but
yeah, I still think it's Hallebuck
you think
because
so?
it's a bit of a boomer bust because there's potential he can flame out, but if he lives up to even like 60-70% of his potential, then that can take a team to the
60
Stanley Cup.
70% of Hellbuck is probably still top 10 in the league.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, that's what I'd say. Like obviously, DeBrincat and Hannafin can make a difference, but like they think of thinking of both of them, they still had pretty good teams behind them and couldn't elevate.
True.
If you put Hallebuck in a better situation, then I think you're
Well,
going to see.
I'd argue
pretty
Winnipeg's always been a
significant
pretty good defensive team. Like for the most part, they've had a couple of years where they were kind of flimsy, but I think he's proven that he can play. He plays well whether or not he has an elite defensive core in front of him. And he's definitely proven
Yeah.
that. I personally,
I think so.
I definitely agree with you on that. I think it's probably going to be Hellbuck because I mean, you even made the point about let's say money isn't real and he somehow ends up on Toronto, like you said. like that team ends up being pretty insane, right? You gotta, because
Yeah.
Hellebuck with a defensive, because Toronto's got pretty good defense. They've all, I mean, I don't have to tell you about their elite forward core, but that team, they look pretty unstoppable there. That looks, yeah, that'll be tough to
Yeah.
beat.
I think
I could,
I,
I don't know where I think he'd go though. He's a tough
no,
guy to kind of pin down.
he is because it's pretty restrictive in which teams can afford him.
Yeah, and I think there's also the fact that obviously he wants to go to an elite team, but what elite team is going to have the cap room to pay him 10 million?
It's a good question.
That's
Or
definitely
like,
something to look into.
you know what would honestly be I can't imagine like I'd have to look up cap numbers, but
I'm waiting for like the
just
outlandish.
yeah, like I'm not even thinking too outlandish. Just like if he wants to go to an elite team, maybe not. But there's certain up and coming teams, right, that this could push them to be like consistent contender. I'm thinking Buffalo. I'm thinking
Ooh,
Ottawa.
oh,
Like,
that'd be interesting. Him on
wouldn't you
Ottawa,
think?
I can see. Ottawa, I can see actually because that is definitely a team where I don't know. Again, I haven't watched a lot of Ottawa Senators games, admittingly. I apologize, but I can definitely say I feel like yeah, that'd be interesting seeing him on Ottawa because they've had some elite goaltenders over the years. I mean, at least elite playoff goaltenders. When I think of a guy who elevates in the playoffs, I definitely think Craig Anderson. I don't know if I mean
Oh yeah.
he was pretty good in the 2010s. But I mean,
Oh yeah.
you throw him another guy like that, like Hellebuck in the playoffs. Oh, that'd be tough. And I mean,
Oh
you
yeah.
mentioned
I'm
what was
thinking
the other team you mentioned there? Buffalo,
Buffalo.
I believe. Who do they have? They have a young goaltender.
They have Devin Levi coming up the
Right,
pipe.
right, yeah. Which is again, you open up the Bobrovsky and Markstrom thing again, where do you really want to pay a goalie that much if you have a guy coming up the tank? And obviously, you can argue goaltending prospects kind of go, they're kind of flimsy. It's kind of like you never know with them, right? I mean, you could even personally, again, as a very, very biased Flames fan on this topic, I think that Wolf is going to be insane. But even then, you got to think about it cautiously because we've seen goaltenders look absolutely incredible and then turn into garbage, right? Like that's not a
Yeah.
very uncommon thing in this league. So you gotta think whether you'd rather have a very strong veteran goaltender who you can probably get another, let's say, I think Hellebuck's in his 30s now. He's say probably another 2-3 elite years out of, right? Or do you risk it and try and run it with a prospect? And that's the situation that I think a team like Buffalo would probably be looking at, right?
hmm
Is it now or
Yeah,
later?
yeah, and I think I'll kind of wrap it up more by just throwing a couple other teams out there. And all the issue is with some of these more elite teams is that cap space is tight, right?
Yeah.
But there's one spot that I'm looking at that would have the space to sign him that I think would be probably the best spot he could go. But throwing some other names out there, the Red Wings have the fourth highest cap space in the league. The Devils have the fifth. The Kraken are seventh.
In my head,
It's
when I was
another
thinking,
team.
you mentioned young teams, I was kind of thinking Kraken. That'd be an interesting pair.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, you have to deal with like, I think Grubauer already has a pretty big contract. You have to
True.
figure out
Yeah.
what to do with that, but you might be able to figure that out. The number one team that just looking at cap space that I would consider would be Carolina.
Ooh. Who do they have
They have-
currently? They've kind of.
They have
I'm blanking.
They have Frederick Anderson and Antti Ranta.
Is
Not the best
Yeah.
goalie
That's
for
not the
serviceable.
best. Yeah, it works. Like, it's obviously worked for them.
But I think Carolina has continually been that team that just needs one thing to get over the hump, right? They've been swept in how many ever straight Eastern Conference Finals. Don't you
Yeah.
think Hallebuck would
that would
be
be
the
a-
one to push them
yeah.
to the finals?
If he goes there,
And they
that'd be a
got
tough
20,
team to
24
beat.
million. 24
Ooh.
million cap space.
You
More
know
than
what?
enough.
Yeah, like I would not be surprised if out of nowhere we just started seeing Carolina rumors in my head. After you pointed that out, I could definitely see that for sure.
Yeah.
Did you hear William Karlsson's speech? Like at the
I did.
parade? Yeah. It's
I
pretty
did.
incredible.
Exactly what the speech, exactly what a Stanley Cup winner's speech should be.
Yeah, I agree. I think if it's not drunk and just absolutely making complete nonsense, dunking on every team you beat that year, what's the point?
Yeah.
Like,
And the number one requirement is that you cannot have a shirt. All great winning speeches
of course,
need to be shirtless.
you got to be showing off
Nobody
the
remembers it.
beer gut you developed in the last 24 hours. You gotta,
Yeah.
it's gotta, and I mean with his, that was so good. Like
I mean,
obviously,
yeah,
I didn't get to watch it live. I don't know how many people would have been watching that, but who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. But I can only imagine the spectacle it was on live TV. Them trying to bleep out all the like we beat the we were pretty effing great. Like, oh, so good.
that the if you're a TV station airing any sort of like championship rally,
You
the
got
people on the censor buttons have got to be sweating. That's got to be
Oh.
the hardest day of their year.
Yeah, I can probably imagine. And I mean, with hockey, I mean, I can say I've been in a hockey locker room for most of my life. We certainly aren't afraid to throw out, throw out a couple fun words. And I mean, when the players are drunk, just won the biggest championship there is to win. You can let them throw out a couple
Yep.
fun ones, Like it's hard to get mad at Carlson for letting a couple fly. I mean, although the Arizona diss had me out of my seat a little bit because that was funny. Because I mean, Arizona is such an interesting thing this year or for the last couple of years with them potentially moving, and I mean, they're the easy team to pick on, and I don't blame them for hitting that. And I mean the wholesome Marchessault stuff, like, oh, that's a great Stanley Cup speech. You can't get much better than that.
Yep. Yeah, it's got to be up there with not only just Stanley Cup speeches, but just championship parade moments in general, right?
Oh, for sure. Like there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them like just come to mind, but that's definitely up there for me now. Like,
Oh yeah.
I mean, it feels like there's always that one thing every year. I mean, last year was kind of, who was it? All of a sudden, I can't remember the player, but there was a player who I think left the parade for a second or left the car, ran down, and then tried to get back on and was actually stopped by security. And he had to tell them that he
Oh
was
yeah.
on the team. I don't remember what player it was anymore, but
There's always one moment like that.
Yeah.
Like no matter what sport it is, like thinking to football, like Tom Brady like tossing the
oh yeah,
Super Bowl, the
Gronk
Lombardi
spiking
trophy
it. Or no, that was
Yeah,
Kelsey.
from like boat to boat. Yeah,
Yeah.
Kelsey Gronk spiked it.
Yeah,
People
that's
thought
what it was.
Mahomes took a selfie with a fan with the trophy and then gave the trophy to the fan. Like, there's
Uh,
always something.
Yeah, and that's what's so great. That's what's winning a championship brings to a city. I think is it really does just bring the entire community together and just allows you to celebrate for a minute. Like what an incredible occasion. Especially, I mean, you look at teams that are really hockey cities. I'd argue Colorado. That's a big one. Vegas. We saw them get pretty crazy for their team this year. Like it's always great to see that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially in hockey when most of the players are pretty restrained all year. Kind of the typical. There's a reason
pucks
people
in
make
deep.
fun of. Yeah, the stock answers that
Yeah.
you hear in every interview. I think of like the Zach Hyman clip from
Yeah.
in COVID
Yeah.
where he just kind of started giving like the regular answers before Gene Principe had even started
Oh
talking.
yeah, that's one of my favorite clips. I can fully.
Oh,
I was thinking the same thing in my head. Like I love that clip so much.
Yeah, like stuff like that makes moments like this even better because you know how restrained they have to be throughout.
And the best
The
part
entire
is the second the next season starts, Carlson's going to go right back to that, and you know it.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
this isn't a
Oh,
sign
yeah.
of anything because that's how it is. That's hockey players as a whole. Like you really don't get to see the personality of the players till you win it all, and you get to see them just throw it all out there, and it's great. I love to see it.
Yep, because they got nothing left to lose at that point.
Oh god, no. They made their money.
Yep.
All right. I don't know how much you've been following the NFL offseason so far. I've been trying to stick my head in every once in a while just to see what the big rumor of the day is, and the big one that's come up this week, I think, or one of the biggest. Obviously, there's always something, but Cook and Hopkins potentially teaming up. Both of them are obviously they both just got released by their teams. I think that'd be a really interesting one because that'll just instantly light up whatever offense they go to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's certainly an interesting possibility probably not
No.
realistic.
I feel like we're playing Madden
It
at that
depends.
point, but
Yeah, yeah, where you kind of create your dream team. It's unrealistic in terms of a team that would have the cap space to afford them both,
yeah,
and in terms of them both being relatively older, being potentially not as valuable as they used to be, more so with Hopkins than Dalvin Cook. Um, yeah, I would love to see it. I don't think it's particularly possible. Thinking there that's the other thing too, is there is a reason that both of those teams let them go.
yeah,
Uh, particularly for Dalvin Cook. Thinking about all the other teams in the NFL, of course, this has been a big conversation across the league for the past couple of years. Is how much value does a top running back like Dalvin Cook even have?
yeah,
Because Dalvin Cook is a good runner, a great running back, but can you get 80, 70% of what Dalvin Cook is with a fourth round pick? And especially for teams that are high in cap space and are probably rebuilding, do you want to take that kind of a risk? And I'd say probably not, which is where it gets interesting on in terms of where he goes and how much money he gets. Hopkins is a little bit different because of the position that he plays. Again, people are going to be willing to pay more for a top end receiver. Um,
yeah.
but again,
We've definitely
how
seen
much
that too
and
with like how much wide receivers are getting paid these days. You think of like
Mhm,
guys like
mhm.
Tyreek Hill, he got a huge contract, right? Like there's just guys who are just getting massive deals. I don't know if Hawkins is going to get that because you like you mentioned
I
his
don't think he
value's
will. He's
diminished, but I could still easily see him making over 10 mil. That's not a question. And I and
yeah.
Cook I feel like could be interesting. I don't know what he's going to sign for. That'll be interesting for sure.
It depends how much teams value their running backs and also the age,
Yeah,
because running back is a position that degrades over time.
for sure.
Um,
When you're running that fast into 250-pound linebackers, that just tends to happen.
yeah, and which is why I don't think they're going to get on the same team. Because if you think about it this way, which teams would be in the market for veteran players like Dalvin Cook or DeAndre Hopkins at this point in the career for the cap that they're going to have? It's going to be contenders that are one piece away. They need a running back that'll put them over the edge. Sign Dalvin Cook. You need a receiver. Like I instantly think, just like Ravens need a receiver to put them over the edge.
The other
It's that
team
kind
I've
of.
been hearing as of late that I've heard, although at the same time, I've also heard unrealistic, but just imagine the chaos. Buffalo Bills for Hopkins. That'd be an interesting one. At least personally. Imagine
I.
Diggs and Hopkins. Now that'd be pretty crazy. But I
It's
obviously
not as. It's not as absurd as you might think. Not as absurd as you might
you
think.
don't think so?
The Bills have almost 6 million in cap space. That could. And you can, because you can always. That's the thing with football, is if you have a good enough GM, the salary cap doesn't really exist. You can
Money isn't real.
push all the money into the last year. You can put it all in a signing bonus. Like there's ways you can
Invest in
kind
crypto.
of
There's
circumvent
tons of
the
ways you
cap.
can do it. Like
Exactly.
yeah. And but
Exactly.
obviously
Except
your point of a team looking for that one more piece, I can tell you that the Bills aren't looking for two more pieces, right? They're not going to go out and sign
yeah,
Cook as well. That doesn't make sense. They'll
especially the Bills' philosophy, right?
no,
They're not
they're
a
not a
running
run
team,
team.
and they never.
When they want to pick up 10 rushing yards, they're not going to hand off the ball. They're going to let Josh Allen do it himself. And I mean,
Yeah.
I'd hate to blame. I don't blame him for that at all. Josh Allen could put his head down. So I don't see them in my wildest dreams picking up both. But Hopkins and Diggs, I'd tune into a lot of Sundays. That'd be a fun team.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it, because it's those teams like the Bills that are gonna need that one more piece are just gonna be able to afford the one and just gonna want the one. There's
Yeah.
not a lot of teams that would want both. You can run through quite a bit.
Yeah.
The one interesting one I feel like is the team with most cap space in the league, which would be the Bears.
Ooh, I
The
didn't think
only
about
issue
that.
there is the only issue there is obviously is they're not quite a contender yet. They don't have they've got a good quarterback. They have some interesting pieces around him, but even adding Cook and Hopkins, you're probably not going to be a contender at that point. but it's
Yeah.
the only kind of team where both needs are there. They have the money because you go down the list of teams in the most cap space. Cardinals, obviously not. That's where Hopkins came from.
No.
Panthers, probably not. You're going to want to build around Bryce Young a couple more years. Colts, they even more so. No, that seems
no,
like
not
more of a
happening.
rebuild.
they got
Jets,
Jonathan Taylor.
yeah, the Jets is intriguing, but I don't think they'd be willing to take a chance on Cook. They've got Brees Hall in the backfield. They already have a ton of receivers.
And with how high Rodgers is on Garrett Wilson, do you think Rodgers would be willing to throw a guy in front of him on that lineup, or if he wants to try and give Wilson the chance to kind of spread his wings and fly a little bit?
I'm sure he would. Like, it's not, if you get a DeAndre Hopkins, you don't complain.
I guess that's
But
true.
at the same time, if you're Joe Douglas in the front office of the Jets, are you looking at Hopkins and saying this will make our team markedly better than it is already? Because I don't know if you've been perusing the Jets depth chart as of recently, but let me just
can't say I have.
can't say you have.
I can't say I have.
Let me just read off like some of these receivers they
Sure.
have. They've got Garrison Wilson, right? They also have McCole Hardman. They have Alan
Speedster.
Lazard. They have Corey Davis. They have Denzel Mims, who is gone under the radar, but has the potential to be a good player. And then you have the Aaron Rodgers pick, Randall Cobb, who, while I don't think he's good at this point in his career, he's gonna get playing time.
Locker room guy. Yeah. Well, I mean, and I'm just going to point this out.
6 players right there.
When I think about how many wide receivers are usually going to be on the field, it's going to be 4 or 3 or 4, in that range, right? Normally.
Mm-hmm.
You named 6.
Because who's on the cutting room? So let's say you get Hopkins.
So let's
Wilson.
And you pointed out Cobb's going to get playing time because he's Aaron Rodgers' bestie. They like to go for ice cream cones and all that after the game. Like the whole thing. He's there. He's there to stay. Right. Automatically, you're looking at 3 more starting spots if you want to look at it right now. Right? Garrett Wilson, obviously. That's the big one, right? That's the big guy. That's your star. Throw Hopkins in there. You got Lazard back there. You have Corey Davis. You mentioned Mims. Like that's a lot of depth that you don't need. Like that's too much.
You're already, as you are right now, sitting one of either Corey Davis, Randall Cobb, or Denzel Mims.
Yeah.
And there's various reasons why that's not going to happen.
Cobb isn't going to get sat. Did he mention Lazard there? Because I think that's another guy. Aaron Rodgers' bestie. They go for ice cream. That's not happening. Feel like Corey Davis might be, taking the short straw on that one. Even though I'd argue he's probably the best one.
Yes, I think he is the best one. And also, given how much money you paid him, that the Jets paid him in free agency, do you want to have him kind of rotting on your bench?
Probably
I don't think so.
Probably not. So that's going to be an interesting situation for him.
Spend that money. Yes.
There's other
ways that the Jets spend that money. And I can keep going down the list with all of these and just finding reasons why one or the other doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's the thing with this. It's so out there, right? It's almost like, I don't know. It's almost like making an argument, and this is a bit different, but like I'm going to bring it back to hockey. That's my safe space. But like you look at maybe like the idea of like, I don't even know, like at this point in their career, Ovi and Crosby, right? Ovechkin and Crosby. Imagine if, but let's say we're throwing everything on the table. Both are, both are free agents. Do you really think, even if they said they wanted to team up, do you think any team in their right mind would actually do that? No. Because it's universally, in almost any sport, I'd argue, except baseball. Baseball is the one exception to that. But I think that in any of the 4 major North American sports, football, basketball actually. That's a basketball and baseball, I guess. You can put them together. Besties can play together in those 2 sports. But hockey and football, a little tougher.
Yeah, and that doesn't even even the hockey example doesn't. There's not as much of a stigma around like positional value, right? It's not as much to be not as much like the running, the value of a running back isn't really in
It
hockey.
is different. Yeah, it is. I agree. It is. I was kind of thinking more payment wise, but you're right on that because
In
I
terms
was going down the
of how
wrong road.
replaceable they can be, in
Yeah,
terms of how replaceable they can be.
for sure. Yeah, I
Um,
definitely agree with you on there. And I mean, so let's wrap this up. Cook and Hopkins
Let
teaming
me.
up. Is it going to happen? No, probably not.
I'll. Can I wrap up with just one? It's obviously, as you said, not going to happen.
Yeah.
Can I? I'll throw out a Madden dream type scenario to just ponder upon.
Okay.
That is
I'm excited.
possible.
Okay.
Uh, Picture this: DeAndre Hopkins and Dalvin Cook playing for the Philadelphia Eagles. They have 13, $14 million in cap space. Theoretically possible. I'll just leave it at that.
Ooh.
That's kind
Skip
of the
the
gist of the
season.
conversation.
16 or 17
Yeah.
and 0. Sorry, right to the Super Bowl. It's over. Don't even
Yeah.
play. Let the
Oh yeah.
practice team play that week. Who cares? Wouldn't
Yep.
even matter. Oh yeah, that's not
Yeah.
happening.
I mean, that's kind of the gist of this conversation, right?
Yeah.
We haven't played a meaningful football game since February. It's a fun little thing to think about,
Of
but in
course.
the end, it's not going to matter.
Welcome to football talk in June.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're playing Madden at this point more than we're watching football. So like I said, I've been hopping in and out of the NFL offseason all year really, and really only paying attention to the stories that I found interesting. That's kind of just how I follow most sports off seasons for the most part. And the thing that stuck out to me, and I mentioned to you before we started the podcast, was Baker Mayfield versus Kyle Trask for the starting job over in Tampa. That it's such an interesting idea to me because they're both neither. I'd almost argue neither are really starting caliber, but yet they're being thrust into a job that they're replacing the goats, right? You got to realize that. So it's for me. I've been kind of keeping an eye on it. I'm whoever starts week one. It's gonna be an interesting one for sure.
Oh yeah, it's an easy thing to laugh about because you see the clips on
Yeah,
Twitter or whatever of them missing their targets by however many yards, and I'm not the biggest Kyle Trask fan of all time. It's I think even as he was picked a little early in the draft. I know this is kind of their I don't know if this is their game plan to have him sit behind Brady for a year, but he was never the kind of quarterback that I would see as a starter. To me, he's the kind of guy who goes in if your starter gets injured. He can manage your offense, perhaps, but not a starting quarterback. He's at
just to
least
point
in
out,
this league.
did anybody think Brady was gonna be starting?
It's
So
true. It's true.
that
But
argument obviously can only that's throwing
yeah,
that's
you
a
can you can kind of pick at that there, right? You're like,
yeah.
then anybody think Russell Wilson's going to be a starter, and anyone think um, Tom Brady's going to be a starter, but then it's all the guys you don't remember, right? That were
Yeah,
drafted in
for
the
sure.
second, third, fourth round, and Kyle Trask doesn't have at least. Brady is the one exception, as he is with
Yeah,
most
of
things.
course.
At least, like with Russell Wilson, it's always like he has the skills, but it's one glaring flaw. It's like these kind of prospects, even to a lesser extent. You think Mahomes,
It's the guys
Josh
that
Allen.
yeah, and it's the guy you hear as being kind of the sit for a year, then maybe we'll think about
Yeah,
it kind of guys. I mean, you're hearing that a lot. For example, Anthony Richardson, he's the guy that everybody's talking about being either going to be incredible or the biggest bust ever, right? Like
yeah.
that's the big thing with him. I mean, yeah, I'll let you pick that up there, but
Oh, yeah. And there's a reason that guys like Richardson are going higher and higher in the draft because it was guys like Mahomes and Allen who are kind of sitting in like the like 10th overall to like mid-teens kind of picks, and now Richardson's going as high as like I believe it was 5 to the Colts.
yeah,
It's because you're seeing teams value these more physical attributes a little bit more, and so Kyle Trask drafted in 2020. There's a reason he wasn't drafted in the first round. There's a reason he fell to the end of the second. He's not a traits kind of guy who you're going to look at as kind of a boomer bust. He has a ceiling. that's very low. He can be a quarterback that, if everything else goes right, can win a few games, but otherwise, like, he's not going to elevate you anything beyond that. And it's funny, at this point in his career, I could almost say the same about Baker Mayfield. However, he does have a little bit of the um, clutch gene in him um, that
Yeah.
still revives from time to time. Think of the Rams game against the Raiders, I believe, I believe it was the Raiders, where
Yeah.
he
I think that's right.
on Monday night, where he came back and it was like he looked like he was at the peak of his career again.
Oh yeah.
I'm
Well, a
more
lot,
I'm
a lot of
more of
times
a
during that LA run, he looked very, very solid. But there's also a lot of times during that LA run where he kind of, looked like Baker Mayfield. So
yeah. I do think that as a collective NFL society, I think we've given up on Baker Mayfield a little bit too early.
maybe.
Because think about where we were 2 years ago, where he was the savior of a Browns organization that had been the laughingstock of the league for like 10 years. He
Yeah.
was the one to get into the playoffs and win a game. And don't you forget that they almost beat the Chiefs. It came down to a miracle Chad Henne 20-yard run, right? It's it's crazy to think how far we've come. And the reason
Yeah.
that he's fallen so far is because of the injury that he chose to play through. And I think that diluted his own stock almost, right? Um, so do we really know what Baker Mayfield is like? Has he really fully recovered from that injury? And does he have a higher ceiling than people are giving him credit for? That's why in this quarterback battle, I'm taking Mayfield any day of the week, because at least he
And I think
has the
most people are.
potential
I
to
think
elevate.
that's we can ramp up and build the stories about Kyle Trask versus Baker Mayfield, but it's kind of it's a hard thing to even call a battle in my opinion. It's because sure, Kyle Trask, he had a pretty good college career, right? That's he or at least a pretty good decent one, right? But can
Yeah.
you even argue that a good college career is even comparable to a decent NFL run? Because you can if you're trying to call Baker Mayfield's NFL run bad, like you just pointed out, he definitely had his highs, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's not really comparable. It's definitely Baker is definitely the guy with more of a resume. He's probably more skilled and arguably more physically. He's got all of it, right? He's the full package. It's just whether he can turn that into real success. That's what we're gonna have to see.
Yes, and also along those lines, it's what are the Bucks looking for? Because we can obviously say Baker is the better quarterback, but the only reason you'd start tracks is if you have a young team and you want to see what you have. That's not what the Bucks are. They're only a few years removed from winning the Super Bowl, and they still have a good core around them. Because think about who these guys are throwing to. They're still throwing to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, right? There's
True.
still a good team around them. So that's why I think Baker Mayfield is the better option. And I think the other thing to consider, and the interesting comparison to make as a Seahawks fan, is the Geno Smith Drew Lock competition last year,
Yeah.
because we were hearing the exact same things. I know there was some sort of analyst last year who was just like ripping the Seahawks to shreds, saying it's the most like embarrassing quarterback battle in the history of the sport or something.
And the funny
And
thing is,
Geno
like,
Smith,
I obviously opened it by almost saying the same thing about this one, right? I mean, who
yeah,
knows? You're putting that out there. I could end up looking like that guy, right? Who knows?
mhm.
You never know.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing because it can fluctuate so much from year to year. And with Geno, it was not given the opportunity after a couple of bad years with the Jets. Is it the same thing with Baker Mayfield? Right? It's impossible to say because Geno feels like such an outlier.
Yeah.
But the comparisons, like between these situations at least, are kind of easy to draw,
And
right?
you could also make the argument that Geno's was almost more of a ability to build the. Everybody liked Geno even when he was a backup, and he was on that team for a lot of years before taking the mantle, right? I
Yeah.
feel like almost, and you can tell that he's such a skilled leader, and he was able to really build that locker room around him and really bring them all together around the abilities that he may not have shown, but he wanted to show, right? Can you really
Hmm.
make the argument that in one offseason, Baker Mayfield is able to build that mentality in this Bucks locker room? That's the interesting to me, and the reason I have a hard time comparing them. I feel like that's
Yeah.
kind of it's not the same. It's not the same.
In terms of personality, I think, yeah, no, it's not the same. But in terms of playing situation, purely based on skill, I think it is very similar. In terms of you start off your career. Even Baker had even better career, better like if you were to compare the careers of Baker Mayfield and Geno Smith before Geno had his breakout year last year, you would say Baker Mayfield was the overall better career quarterback. But it's the same kind of thing where you have a start to your career and then things go south. Geno gets benched, Baker gets hurt, he tries to play through it, gets benched, gets traded to Carolina, plays awful there. But then it's the same kind of thing where you're given another opportunity in a team that is a little bit better of a culture, right? Because you make the point about Geno facilitating that locker room culture with, I think the good thing about the Bucs is that they already have a winning culture there, right? They already have.
I definitely was not thinking that. Yeah, I definitely see what you mean there.
They already have that players who know how to win. Like there will be a Brady after effect.
True, but do you think those players are necessarily thinking right now that they are going to win with Baker? Do you think they're bought in?
Every team has to be at this point in the year. Okay. Do you think you can make that same argument about the Seahawks last year? Nobody thought they would be good, but there's always teams.
Yeah, I guess that was kind of a bold statement, but yeah, I definitely see what you mean.
Like you can't, as an NFL, like that's kind of gets into another argument, right? Of do NFL teams ever really tank? Like the GMs can by cutting your players, but the players aren't going to give up on the team. This is their job, it's their life, this is their passion. They're not going to.
One bad year in the NFL and you could be in the CFL the next one. So yeah, you never know.
Yeah, it's such a next guy up mentality that you need to take advantage of the opportunities that you're given. And so whatever quarterback the Buccaneers have, the rest of the team is going to try their best to support him. So it's going to be an interesting year, given how stark the contrast is between the situation that they've been in as a perennial Super Bowl contender to feeling a little bit like a laughingstock as of right now.
Yeah. So ending it off, you're the Bucs head coach. You're watching all of this. You're watching all the tape. You're watching them both miss throws by 5 yards. And you are looking at who's going to be your starter in week 1. Who are you going with?
Mayfield.
Yeah.
It's easily Mayfield.
I mean, even asking the question, I was here for the last 10 minutes, I know. But I just wanted to throw it out there. Let's finish it off. Mayfield's the guy to go with. That's the way that I think it's. I mean, if you want to win, right? Kyle Trask is younger. You could argue maybe, who knows, right? I mean, I can definitely say, you look at a guy like Purdy, throwing him out there, you definitely didn't think that he definitely had any of the physicals to pull it off, and he pulled it off, right?
Yeah.
You never know what a young quarterback can do when you give him the right pieces. But, I mean, we've been compared that comparison. We're comparing him to Purdy. We're comparing him to Geno. That's two guys who. That's tough, right? That's two people who you can't necessarily compare, right? Because they're such a rare situation.
Yeah. No, it'll definitely be interesting because the examples of Purdy and Geno are definitely the peak of what they can be. It's hard to come up with an example for the floor of what they can be because that is so often forgettable, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just going to be a 3-14 Bucs season that we sweep.
Baker's floor is Baker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
simple as that.
I pose one last question to kind of finish it off. So I don't think players would tank. However, you have one of the better quarterback prospects in the last few years, sans Trevor Lawrence, coming up in Caleb Williams. Do you start Kyle Trask if you're a GM of the Bucs? Do you start Kyle Trask, ride this year out, hope to get a low pick, maybe?
I think
see if you can trade up for the number 1 pick if you don't finish there.
And I think that all comes back
right back to where you are.
Yeah, I think that all comes back around to how bought in you are on Baker Mayfield, right? Like, do you think all the people in Tampa are thinking this guy was the first overall pick? All he needs is a good system, good atmosphere, good all these things that Tampa provides, and he can turn it around? Or are you thinking that this guy's going to come in for a year, lead you to be mediocre, 8-8 at best, You mentioned 8-9 at best. I'm still living in a 16 game season, and 3-14 at worst. Or are you thinking that you want Caleb Williams? That's kind of what I'm questioning back.
Oh yeah, I think it's just difficult, right? Because there's no guarantees.
Yeah,
But if I'm a Bucks fan, the best case scenario for me is to do terrible this year, get the first overall pick, draft Caleb Williams, and then be an instant Super Bowl contender again. Any other way, you're not gonna like who knows? Free agency trades happen,
sure.
but that's the surest fire way to maintaining to like open that championship window up even more because I think Caleb Williams will be special, not just because I share his name.
And I and I don't think you're alone in that opinion either.
Yeah, there's a reason that I know I was listening to another football podcast, Bootleg Football. They were talking about who's the player, Jordan Addison, I believe, at USC. They going to USC's pro day. Caleb Williams is there to kind of help Addison, who is now drafted by the Vikings. And even though Williams not eligible this year, about half the scouts are watching him. People
Yeah,
know what's
for
coming
sure.
down the pipeline.
Yeah, and you always see that with those big prospects in any sport. You always see them being scouted heavily, even if it's not the draft year. I mean, I could
Yeah.
name a list of, you know what I mean? Like that's a common thing.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know how much you've been paying attention to the MLB season this year. I've been trying to jump in and out every once in a while. I'm not necessarily the biggest MLB fan, but I like to watch a game probably once a week. And a story that immediately stuck out to me is Rob Manfred taking a shot at the Oakland A's fans who did a bit of a reverse boycott in the last week, where, funnily enough, they showed up to a game, which you would not think would be. Well, I guess that's the entire idea of a reverse boycott, but it's just an interesting little strategy there. I mean, obviously they're not happy with Oakland potentially leaving, and obviously that potentially there is kind of disappearing with as we get closer to it being a bit more of a possibility. But them losing another team to Las Vegas, that's got to suck.
Yeah, it definitely does, and it's the comment he made. It's the I have it here. It's he said it's great to see what is this year almost an average MLB crowd in the facility for one night. That's a great thing. It's very dismissive and
Little
almost
shot.
yeah. Feels like he's putting the nail in the coffin almost. It's
Yeah.
not compare it to Gary Bettman and the Coyotes where he's pulling out
That's
all this stuff to try and save them and
yeah.
with Manfred, it's a very dismissive, moving on. This is happening. Kind of nothing you can do to stop it type move, which is quite disappointing for the fans, considering the teams that they've lost in the last few years. They had the Warriors move across the bay, I believe, into
Yep. San Francisco.
facility in San Francisco.
Yep.
They've obviously lost the Raiders, and now they're losing the A's. So
Yeah.
all of the pro sports in Oakland are they're no more because obviously the NHL. I talk about the Oakland Golden Seals, but I think they've probably healed from that
We
wound at
can
this
we
point.
can leave that one in the past. I think
Yeah,
they're not
yeah.
they're not
I think
crying about that one anymore.
no, I think the heartbreak is kind of worn off in that one, but the rest of them, that's in like a 5 year span.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's rough. That's a really rough situation there. I mean, with the funny thing is like obviously we saw Warriors and Raiders leave first. I'd argue that probably the A's are the one that makes the most sense in the fact that like if they hadn't just lost the Warriors and the A's or sorry, and the Raiders, I feel like this wouldn't be a controversial opinion in my opinion. I feel like we would
no,
I feel like it wouldn't be as shocking anyway. Or it still isn't
no.
shocking. You know what I mean? It wouldn't be as heartbreaking.
Yeah, there's been talk of the A's moving for. I can remember it being brought up as
Yeah.
like 5 6 years ago.
Oh,
They've
sure.
never had the type of crowds that you would need, and I mean it's a little bit more difficult in the MLB because I think that's also an MLB wide problem,
Yeah.
which I think is kind of what the fans are getting at, right? With the whole reverse boycott situation, it is to show that if the money was put into the team, if the team was good, if they weren't, I don't know, last time I checked, they were like 20 wins and like 60 losses. If
Yeah,
they,
they haven't been pretty good the last 2 years. That's for sure.
no, the point kind of being with them showing up to game is like the fan support is here. You still have the fans, we're just not going because it's such a dreadful product on the field. And it kind of gets into more of the bigger issue in the MLB, the lack of a salary cap of how can
Yeah.
you ever have a small market like Oakland survive? Um,
Yeah, and
and
that's
it'd be
definitely
interesting
a
to
big
see.
issue with that sort of thing. I mean, obviously, you pointed out from the fan standpoint, it's heartbreaking. I mean, what do you even do as an Oakland fan anymore? Like, are you just a Vegas fan?
Yeah, or do you move across the bay, become a Giants fan?
Oh, maybe. I feel like that might be tough. That might be
No,
tough to do.
because it's tough to switch teams, right? You got to put yourself in the shoes. Like this, that the Seahawks ever moved. Could I ever bring myself to
To
cheer
be
for
a
Seahawks if they weren't in Seattle?
yeah,
Like I think it would be tough, and I don't even live in the city, right?
sure, yeah.
Yeah,
It definitely would be. Yeah, I definitely see what you mean. I mean, for me, my big team is the Flames. If the Flames left, I don't know what I'd do. Truthfully, like that's a tough situation. And I mean, you've obviously been with the arena talks for the Flames. That's definitely been a conversation. But I mean,
mhm.
let's say the Flames go to Quebec. That's a tough team to cheer for now, right? I mean,
Yeah,
personally, I'm a hometown guy. I like to cheer for my hometown team. So I don't know.
yeah, yeah, definitely. It's tough, especially when you know that it's not like in Arizona. Like I like to compare it to the Coyotes because it's the
Yeah,
of the four major sports, it's the other franchise receiving these kind of talks. With the Coyotes, it feels yes, it's an ownership issue, and yes, they've been awful, but it does like the fan support also hasn't been there. With
sure.
Oakland,
Yeah,
like the fan support hasn't been there, but it's a much bigger thing in baseball to say um, you have this owner who's cutting costs and like you don't have the same money to sign the players. They literally made a movie about this, right? This is
yeah, for
the
sure.
entire concept of Moneyball is the A's are and it is the A's in the movie, right? The A's are playing
Yeah,
almost a different sport than teams like the Yankees. To for the A's to be good, it requires so much more effort and scouting than any of the other teams in the MLB. So that's part of what is kind of the salt in the wound here.
yeah.
So not only having your team move, but knowing that it's almost a systemic problem that you can't even really do anything about.
For sure. And I mean, you mentioned, like, obviously the money problem, that's big. As heartbreaking as it is for Oakland fans, I mean, think about Oakland now going to Las Vegas. Las Vegas, you're going to have the money, right? Like, at least in my head, I'm thinking that. Like, all of a sudden, I mean, same ownership. That's still a problem. But when you've got a team in Las Vegas, at least you'd think there'd be more fans going in, right? Like, you got to think that everybody in Las Vegas is going to be excited to have a baseball team. So, who knows? There's an upside
Yeah,
there, but
yeah, no, you would think so, and you'd hope you'd potentially hope so. It is kind of a thing. Just thinking about another comparison I make is to like the Supersonics in basketball, where
yep, yep,
it
that's
seems
the
like you
big
have
one.
an owner determined to move the franchise out of the city. That was what it was with Clay Bennett and the Supersonics. He was from Oklahoma City. He was determined to move.
Yeah,
In Oakland, like reading more on the situation, it was the A's had a decent team. They made the playoffs as early as 2020, but then they got torn down. Have the lowest payroll in baseball. Um, they've ever since then they've raised ticket prices without improving fan experience and are now using their poor attendance numbers to justify their decision. It's kind of the thing where it's almost like it's a problem you create for yourself as the owner just because you want the new shiny home in Las Vegas. That's
yeah.
another part that's difficult about it.
Well, it's just heartbreaking. There's no way to put it that is gonna make it better for Oakland fans. That's the end of the day. There's no I could not if you told Oakland fans right now that the upside to this was that they were going to get a prime Babe Ruth on their team in Vegas, they probably still wouldn't do it. Like, that's the truth, right? Like, there's no upside to this for them.
Yeah.
Hi. Thanks so much for watching. And I just wanted to quickly say that in me and Caleb's Infinite Brilliance, completely forgot to record an outro. I just finished editing it, so I'm very tired. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. I wanted to put something at the end here for anybody who made it this far. Thank you so much. It really does mean a lot. And make sure to check us out on any other platform, no matter where you're watching or listening this. There's always more versions. Trust me, I know I edited all of them. And I'll be throwing some stuff up on TikTok, some of the clips and any stuff like that. So make sure to check us out there. All the platforms will have the same name. And I think that's it. I think that's all I have to say. So yeah. Make sure to tune in next week. It'll probably be going up on a Friday. I think the only reason we did a Thursday this week was because I wanted to get it out in time for the NBA draft. And or we both did, sorry. And yeah, I mean, next week we don't have any sort of requirements like that, so probably on a Friday. So expect it then, and see you around. Thanks for watching.